baby! You can't do this to me!
Mommy, please.
Don't leave us.
Mommy.
The room went still. Joshua was the first to move. He grabbed the phone, read it, shouted once, sharp and loud, then laughed the way someone laughs when something hurts and heals at the same time. Caleb snatched it next, read, punched the air. Ethan sat up straight. Noah woke up blinking. Daniel stayed where he was, arms folded, staring at the floor, until Michael walked over and put the phone in his hand. Daniel read the numbers, looked up at his father. For a second, his face was the same face from school, the one that had learned to expect nothing good. Then something cracked. Not loud, just a small, quiet shift. He handed the phone back and said very softly, "You did it, Dad." David pulled them all in, right there on the concrete floor between the mattresses and the stove. 7 bodies pressed together, some laughing, some crying, some doing both at once. The kerosene lamp flickered above them. Outside, a neighbor's generator hummed. Inside, for the first time in years, the room did not feel too small. The deal did not come quickly. That was the first thing David told his sons when they were done with dinner. It was a signed supply agreement with an oil services company based in Port Harcourt, a company that needed a reliable partner for the importation and delivery of specific industrial materials. The deal had taken 3 years of no's, countless trips on night buses with proposals printed at a business center, meetings where men in good suits looked at David's worn shoes and spoke slowly as if he might not understand big words. David had first approached the company 2 years earlier. They had turned him down twice, but the third time he had shown up with better documentation, a cleaner proposal, a referral from a small supplier who had watched his persistence and decided it meant something, and a quiet promise to himself that this time he would not leave without a signature. He finally got the signature, and now the advance payment was in his account. They moved to Banana Island 6 weeks later. The mansion was quiet when they first walked in. No neighbors shouting through thin walls, no shared tap or shared toilet. The gates closed behind the moving van with a soft electric click. Inside, marble floors cool under bare feet, high ceilings that made voices echo gently. A kitchen with a fridge that hummed steadily instead of coughing like the old one in Ajegunun. 6 bedrooms, 1 for each boy, 1 for David. Windows that looked out on green lawns and the lagoon in the distance. Noah walked through the house on the first day without saying a word. He opened every door. He stood in each room for a moment, looking around slowly, as if he needed to confirm with his own eyes that the space was real and that it was theirs. When he reached the last bedroom, he sat down on the edge of the bed, put his face in his hands and cried quietly for about 3 minutes. Then he stood up, wiped his face, and went to help bring in the bags. David brought the cars 3 weeks later. 3 of them. A sleek white Mercedes Maybach, a white Tesla Cybertruck, and a white G-Wagon parked side by side in the wide compound, each one worth more than the entire Ikeja house had been at its best. The boys stood in a line in the driveway, morning sun bouncing off clean paint and chrome. Joshua walked around the Maybach, hand trailing along the hood. "This thing costs more than some people see in 10 years, he said quietly. Caleb crossed his arms. "If we ever sell it, we're getting at least 20% more in 2 years. Daniel did not touch the cars. He just looked at them, then at his father, then back. "We used to wash cars like these for 200 naira. His voice was even, but his eyes were far away, remembering school taunts, torn books, abandoned boy echoing in corridors. He shook his head once, slowly. "And now we own them." David put a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "We earned them," he said, "all of us." Then David did the most important thing. He sat with each of his sons alone, one evening, each in the new sitting room with the big windows open to the evening breeze. He asked the same question every time. "What do you need to go further?" Michael needed trading capital. Real money behind the charts he had studied for years on borrowed screens. David transferred it without fanfare. 4 months later, Michael closed 2 trades that tripled the seed. He sent half the profit back to his father the same day. When David saw the alert, he sat at the kitchen island, a real kitchen island, and stared at the phone until the screen went dark. Daniel asked for almost nothing: a good laptop, unlimited internet, a quiet desk. With those, the skills he had built in Torchlight took off. 6 months in, he landed his first Upwork contract, dollars, not naira. A year later, a Texas software company offered him a full remote role. The morning the first salary landed, Daniel sat on his bed looking at the notification. He remembered Festus's voice in class. "Your mama ran away because your papa has nothing." He transferred a portion to David, then went to the balcony alone. He stood there a long time, wind in his face, not crying, just breathing like someone finally allowed to exhale. The twins, Joshua and Caleb, received forex trading accounts funded with enough capital to make meaningful positions. They immediately turned it into a competition. Breakfast arguments over candlestick patterns, tracking each other's weekly returns, arguing over strategies at night, comparing figures with the specific intensity of 2 people who have been competing their entire lives and love each other completely because of it. By the end of the first year, they were both profitable. By the second year, they had a small system of their own, managing signals and positions for other clients, splitting commissions like they had split everything else their whole lives. Ethan, who had spent years reading about blockchain on printout pages in Ajegule, used his funding to build. He designed a small decentralized finance project, a DeFi protocol for micro-lending, and launched it quietly. It gained users slowly, then not so slowly. Within 18 months, it had enough traction that 2 people from overseas contacted him about investment. He had just turned 21 years old. Noah used his money differently. He enrolled in a real estate course, found a small property in an up-and-coming area of Lagos that was underpriced because the owner needed quick cash, negotiated carefully, bought it, and resold it 4 months later for a profit that made even Joshua and Caleb briefly stop arguing and look at their youngest brother with new eyes. They ate differently now. Full plates of jollof with chicken, egusi soup thick with stockfish, fresh oranges in a bowl on the table just because someone felt like buying them. Sometimes, in the middle of dinner, one of them would pause, fork halfway to mouth, and the room would go quiet for a second. They remembered Gary bowls, salt on rice, David's orange Okada vest. The memory lived under their skin. It made every meal taste like more than food. Grace's name almost never came up. When it did, it passed like a shadow, quick, then gone. Nobody pulled it out to examine. They had all gotten over her betrayal and grown used to her absence. They had actually built something strong for themselves without the encouragement and advice of a mother, so they really did not need her anymore. But strong things can still have cracks. Sometimes, David would sit on the veranda in the evening after the boys had gone to their rooms, looking at the compound gate, saying nothing. He never explained what he was thinking about. He did not need to. Something about the way he sat, very still, very far away, said enough. Nobody in the family knew exactly how Grace's years had gone. Not at first. Grace's downfall did not arrive like a storm. It came like damp rot, slow, persistent, eating away at everything until nothing solid remained. For the first few years after leaving, she floated between lives that looked glamorous from the outside. A businessman in Abuja paid for her hotel suites and weekend trips. A politician in Lagos took her to events where flashbulbs popped and people whispered how elegant she was. Another man, a contractor with oil money, gave her an apartment in Victoria Island and a monthly allowance that felt like freedom. She wore new dresses, laughed at their jokes, told herself the boys were better off without her struggle, that David would manage, that she had chosen life over suffering. But her body began to betray her quietly. It started with an itch that turned into a constant burning when she used the bathroom. Then a rash appeared across her thighs and lower stomach. Red, angry, spreading. She bought creams from pharmacies, hid it under makeup and long skirts. Next came the fevers, Sudden waves that left her shivering under blankets in air-conditioned rooms, sweat soaked in silk sheets. Her joints ached in the mornings, then swelled until bending her knees felt like cracking bone. She lost weight steadily. First her cheeks hollowed, then her arms thinned, then her ribs began to show under skin that no longer glowed. She looked in hotel mirrors and barely recognized the woman staring back. Eyes sunken, lips cracked, once vibrant skin now dull and patchy. She told no one. She kept smiling for the men, until she could not. The day she went for a checkup, the doctor at a private clinic in Abuja delivered the news in a quiet room with white walls and 2 bright lights. Multiple sexually transmitted infections, he said, sliding the test results across the desk. Some have become chronic, some are resistant. You need long-term treatment, possibly specialists abroad, and you need to inform your partners. She sat there holding the paper, hands cold. How long have I had this? Likely years, he said gently. It progressed because it was untreated. She left the clinic with prescriptions she could not fully feel and a bottle of pills that rattled like accusations. That night, the fever hit hardest yet. Body shaking, teeth chattering, pain radiating from her pelvis up her spine. She curled on the bed alone, whispering into the pillow the words she had never allowed herself. Noah, Daniel, I'm sorry. She saw their faces in the dark. Noah clinging to her leg, Daniel staring with hurt eyes, all 6 boys begging in the rain. Word of her illness reached the old circle slowly, through whispers at parties and mutual contacts. She called Sandra first, the woman who had once borrowed her jewelry and called her sister. Sandra answered on the 3rd ring. Grace? She explained her situation carefully, keeping her voice steady. I'm sick, Grace said, voice small. The tests, it's bad. I need help with medicine. Just a loan. Sandra's tone hardened instantly. I heard already, from Cynthia, multiple infections. You've been sleeping around for years, Grace. Now it's caught up. Why would I risk my family's health for you? I'm not asking you to see me, Grace whispered. Just money for the pills. You left 6 children, 6 in poverty for this, and now you want pity. My daughters ask about you sometimes. Auntie Grace who ran away. I tell them you made bad choices. Don't call this number again. The call ended. Fatima was even colder. Grace met her at a quiet cafe in Ikeja, neutral ground. Fatima arrived in sunglasses, sat across the table and looked Grace up and down. The too loose dress, the thin wrists, the tremor in her hands. I know why you are here, Fatima said before Grace could speak. The STDs, the infections, everyone is talking. Grace swallowed. I can't afford the full treatment. Just 500,000. I'll pay back when... Fatima leaned forward. You think I'm stupid? You think I'll send money to someone who might be contagious? My husband said if I help, he'll take the children and leave. You made your bed, Grace. Lie in it. Grace's eyes filled. I'm dying, Fatima. Fatima stood up. You started dying the night you walked out on those boys. Goodbye. She left without paying the bill. Grace sat there until the waiter cleared the table. Then she walked home slowly, each step sending fresh pain through her hips, tears mixing with sweat on her face. The last man she was staying with found the pill bottles in her handbag one evening. He read the labels, face darkening. You have infections, he said. Multiple. Chronic. I'm treating it, she said quickly. It's under control. He told her she had 1 week to live. When she begged, when she actually got on her knees, the way David had once gotten on his knees on a wet floor in Ikeja. Please, just money for the specialist. I have no one. He looked down at her, the woman he had once called beautiful, and said, you should have thought of that before. Then he walked out and locked the bedroom door behind him. 1 week later, she left with one small bag, the broken strap designer purse still in her hand like a relic. She sat in the room she had rented, a single room in a building far from the areas she had once moved through, and she did not cry immediately. She sat on the edge of the thin mattress and looked at the wall and felt the full shape of where her choices had brought her. The weave on her head was weeks old, dry and fraying at the edges. Her designer bag, the one she had carried the night she left, repaired twice now with black thread, sat on the floor beside her. Her ribs, when she pressed her hand to her side, were visible through the fabric of her dress. Fevers came every few nights, shaking so violently the bed frame rattled, vomiting into a plastic bucket because she could not reach the bathroom in time. She lost more weight. Her clothes hung like sacks. She looked in the cracked mirror and saw a ghost of herself. Eyes yellowed, skin sallow, body wasting away. She thought about Noah's face in the rear-view mirror. Then she cried. She cried until her body had nothing left to give. Alone in a room with thin walls and nobody on the other side of them who knew or cared what was happening to her. But then she could not ignore it anymore. She had to find them. She called an old acquaintance who still gossiped in Lagos circles. David Thompson? Oh, he's big now. Banana Island Mansion. The boys are all successful. Crypto, tech, Forex. There was a photo of them in a magazine last month. Grace searched online on a borrowed phone until she found the article. A lifestyle piece with a clear shot of the gate and the address visible in the caption. She copied it onto a folded paper and kept it in her bag like a lifeline. The first time she stood at the Banana Island gate, her knees buckled from pain. The security guard looked at the frail woman, thin dress, cracked lips, eyes desperate, and asked, "Who are you here for?" "David Thompson. I'm his wife, their mother." He called inside, came back and said, "You are not allowed entry. Leave now." But she came back the next morning. The morning after that. Each day the sun found her standing at the same gate, pressing the intercom button with a finger whose nail was beginning to peel, speaking quietly into the speaker. Some days there was no response at all, just the hiss of static and the sound of the street behind her. On the fourth day it rained, a sudden heavy Lagos downpour that flattened what remained of her hair. She stood in it. She did not leave. Her feet in her thin shoes were soaked, blisters forming along her heels where the wet leather pressed. Her lips were dry and cracked despite the rain. She stood and pressed the intercom and waited, rain running down her face, and thought about a 9-year-old boy standing in this exact kind of rain with his arms stretched forward, barefoot, crying out a name. She was that child now. She understood it completely, and the understanding was its own kind of agony. Inside the house, the arguments shook the walls. David told his sons she had been coming to the gate. He told them at dinner, at the long table, where full plates sat in front of men who had once eaten garri for weeks without complaint, and the room fractured immediately. The twins went quiet and looked at each other. Ethan stared at the table. Noah, now in his early 20s, looked at his father with an expression that was not anger, but something more complicated. The face of someone who has spent years building a wall and has just been told there is a door in it they did not know about. Daniel stood up. "No," he said. His voice was flat and setting. "No." "Sit down," David said. "She left us," Daniel said. "She stood in that room and she looked at us and she left. She did not call, she did not write, she did not check if Noah was eating or if any of us were alive, and now she is at the gate and we are supposed to what? Open it." "I am not asking you to forget anything," David said. "Then what are you asking?" David did not answer immediately. He looked at his son, this son who had been pushed in school corridors and had his books torn and had swallowed it all in silence and become something remarkable despite every reason not to. And his voice, when it came, was low and careful. "I am asking you to be bigger than what was done to us," he said. "I am not saying she deserves it. I am saying we decide who we are, not her." Daniel left the table without responding. Grace collapsed on a Thursday afternoon. She had been standing at the gate for nearly 2 hours without response. The heat was severe. She had not eaten properly that morning. Her appetite had been unreliable for weeks, another symptom she managed daily. She pressed the intercom one more time, heard the static, closed her eyes. The dizziness came fast, the way it had been coming lately, sudden, total, leaving no time to reach for anything. She went down on the pavement outside the gate. A woman passing with a basket of vegetables saw her fall and raised an alarm. An Okada man helped drag her to the shade. Someone found the folded paper in her bag, David's number, written in her own handwriting, and called it. David was at the hospital within 20 minutes. He walked into the ward and stopped at the foot of the bed. Grace lay with a drip in her arm and her eyes half open, her frame so reduced under the hospital blanket that he had to look twice to be certain it was her. The face he had once known as full and animated and certain of itself was hollowed now, the cheekbones too prominent, the skin over them dry. Her hands on the blanket were thin and still. She opened her eyes and saw him. And Grace Thompson, who had walked out of a house full of crying children without looking back more than once, began to cry in a way that had no dignity in it at all. Broken, ugly, total. "David," her voice was barely sound. "I am sorry. I am so sorry." She cried, raw, choking sobs that shook her frail frame. "David, the pain never stops," she whispered. "My joints burn like fire. I can't walk some days. I vomit blood at night. I see the boys' faces every time I close my eyes. Noah running after me, Daniel staring. I ruined everything. I'm so sorry." He sat, held her trembling hand, and listened until she had no more words. It took 4 more days to get Daniel into that room. David asked him, Noah asked him, even Caleb, who rarely involved himself in emotional conversations, sat with Daniel one evening and said simply, "You don't have to forgive her for her. Do it because carrying this much anger for this many more years is going to cost you something." Daniel did not respond. But the next morning, he got into the car. He walked into the ward alone. He stood at the door for a moment, looking at the woman in the bed, and felt the full weight of everything that room contained. Every torn book, every cruel word in a school corridor, every night of Gary, every morning his father had tied an orange vest over his shirt. He felt it all at once, the way you feel cold water when you finally stop resisting it. Grace saw him and her face collapsed. "Daniel," she said. Her voice was barely there. He sat down in the chair beside her bed. He did not speak for a long time. "Say it. Whatever you need to say it properly." She told him everything. About the men, about the years, about the moment in the rearview mirror, the one she had looked away from and how it had never fully left her. She said she had told herself for years that they were better off, that they did not need her, that they had their father and each other. She said she knew now that these had been the lies she needed to keep moving. "I was selfish," she said. "I thought money and comfort were everything. I left my children in the rain for a life that ate me alive. I lost my soul, Daniel. I lost it completely." He sat with that. Then he put his face in his hands and his shoulders began to shake, and he wept. Not for her, not exactly, but for the boy who had been called abandoned. For every silent meal, for every piece of himself he had spent years rebuilding from rubble. He wept for all of it, and in doing so, released something he had not known he was still carrying. When he looked up, he reached out and took her thin hand in both of his. He did not say that everything was fine, because it was not. He did not say she was forgiven, because that word felt too clean for something this complicated. But he held her hand, and he stayed in the chair. And that was enough. The family arranged treatment in Dubai, a specialist facility that handled her specific conditions in ways local hospitals could not. David organized it without ceremony. The boys contributed without being asked, without discussion. The money moved quietly, the way everything important in this family had always moved. She came back 3 months later, healthier, quieter, smaller in spirit than the woman who had hosted parties in Ikeja, but more real than she had been in a very long time. She did not try to reclaim her place in the house as though nothing had happened. She rented a small apartment nearby and visited when she was invited, and did not push when she was not. She started spending time with young women in the neighborhood, girls at the kinds of crossroads she had once stood at, and she talked to them plainly about choices and costs, and the things that look like escape but are only another kind of trap. The family was not the same as it had been before the rain. It could never be, but it was whole in a way that mattered. Not the wholeness of something that has never been broken, but the harder, quieter wholeness of something that had been broken all the way through and had chosen, piece by piece, to hold together anyway. David still sat on the veranda some evenings, but the look on his face was different now. The gate was just a gate.